20 million drones, new long-range missiles. Is the war about to change? A major Russian war factory is blazing after a stunning strike. We analyze the damage. Plus, Ukraine secures a revolutionary air defense agreement with France and prepares to launch an incredible 20 million domestically produced drones. Meanwhile, the UK sends in its biggest weapons package yet, and Turkey's Erdogan makes a shock offer to host Putin and Zelenskyy for direct talks. The fighting in Kupiansk is raging, but why do analysts say the potential loss of another key city won't be the turning point? All the details in our special edition of Hotspot. Kupiansk is currently the most intense flashpoint on the front line, with Ukrainian defenders engaged in heavy, persistent battles against Russian forces. We have the full critical update on the strategic situation and what is happening right now in this pivotal sector of the front. Next in our report.
Until November 15th, that was the deadline set by Russian dictator Putin for the capture of Kupiansk. However, the Russian army once again missed its own deadlines and failed to take control of the city. This was stated by the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Currently, Ukrainian units are holding key heights and settlements both in Kupiansk and around the city.
At the moment, the situation in Kupiansk has been largely stabilized.
There, Ukrainian forces continue an active operation to destroy Russian units in the northern part of the city, where the enemy has been cut off from its main supply lines.
I wouldn't say it's very easy, but considering that they are cut off from their main supplies and cannot receive effective reinforcements now, they are currently in a much worse situation than the Ukrainian defenders were even at their lowest point.
To strengthen the defense in the Kupiansk direction, operational reserves have been redeployed, including special operations units with experience in urban combat.
In addition, it was possible, to a significant extent, to stabilize the situation in the direction of Kupiansk-Uzlovoy. This is a key railway station to which the occupiers are trying to break through. They are in dire need of control over this particular logistical component of Ukraine's defense forces in order to use the short logistics route to create a strike group in this direction, which would aim to advance further towards Sloviansk and Kramatorsk along the Oskil River.
And of course, what would it be without Russian fakes? Another masterpiece from the Kremlin. According to the Joint Forces Group, the occupiers have been ordered to film stage videos waving the tricolor flag in places where, in reality, there are only small groups of infantry. They even started putting flags into supply packages that drones dropped to Russian units in the city. At least one such operation has already taken place. But in reality, this stunt played into the hands of the Ukrainian defenders. It became much easier for operators to detect and destroy the enemy.
Recently, the Russians received an order. We started dropping flags to them, and they began waving those flags to show that they were supposedly in the city and to prove that Putin and the general staff weren't lying. But nevertheless, despite all this, these flags clearly reveal the positions from which they are being waved. So they're trading the real presence of Russians in the northern districts of the city for a fake one. Well, this is actually somewhat typical of Russian propaganda, but still.
At the same time, the occupiers have sharply intensified their activity in the area of Milov in the Kharkiv region. There, the enemy wants to create a wide so-called buffer zone from Milov to Kupiansk and further towards Vovchansk.
In other words, the occupiers plan to expand the area of their presence in order to create a precedent for the so-called exchange of territories. That is, they will propose Kupiansk, the Kupiansk districts, and Vovchansk in exchange, respectively, for the withdrawal of Ukrainian units from the areas of Donetsk region under their control.
In Kupiansk, the enemy continues to use scorched earth tactics. This involves the use of army and frontline aviation, as well as strikes with guided aerial bombs on residential neighborhoods of the city. In addition, the heavy flamethrower system Solnsepyok is being used.
This is a thermobaric weapon, which is a type of explosive device that is strictly prohibited for use in urban areas, primarily because of its highly indiscriminate and devastating effects on both people and structures.
And while the occupying army is looking for ways to capture Kupiansk, their massive assaults, rotations, and constant pressure are not yielding the desired results. The majority of the city remains firmly under the control of Ukraine's defense forces, while the Russians are losing dozens of their soldiers every day.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
A major fire reportedly engulfed the Tsun-Kum plant in the Kursk region, a facility confirmed to be working for Russia's military-industrial complex. Meanwhile, the Sunday Times suggests that the potential loss of Pokrovsk would not constitute a turning point in the overall war. We dive deeper into these developments and what is happening across the line of contact in our military review next.
The Russian military-industrial complex is on fire. On the night of November 17th in the Kursk region, the Chinkum plant caught fire. There are also reports of explosions at the Oriel thermal power plant and several substations. The previous evening, strike UAVs hit a substation in temporarily occupied Donetsk. Preliminarily, it was the Chaiki substation with a capacity of 330 kilowatts.
At 11:40 p.m., the entire city was left without power.
Wherever Russia goes, it brings only destruction and death. Footage is being published online from Bakhmut in the Donetsk region captured by the Russian Federation, of which literally nothing remains. The Sunday Times has begun analyzing the situation on the battlefield in the event of a possible loss of Pokrovsk and the neighboring city of Mirnograd. Journalists report that fighting in the northeast will continue as the fortified cities of the Donetsk region are still being held.
At the moment, the main fighting in the city is concentrated around the meat processing plant, the feed mill, and the Dinas residential district. Ukraine's defense forces are holding the multi-story residential district, which is essentially the commanding heights. Holding this district effectively means controlling a significant part of Pokrovsk. Therefore, to talk about the capture of the city in the near future, as some Western media outlets have been reporting, is at the very least very premature.
The situation remains stable on another hot front, the Kupiansk direction.
At present, operational reserves of Ukraine's defense forces have been deployed to the Kupiansk direction, which has significantly stabilized the situation. Moreover, according to the Russian side's own assessments, a significant part of Kupiansk is under the control of Ukraine's defense forces.
Marks for 6 downed cruise missiles were spotted on a French Mirage, which is defending Ukrainian skies. The Air Force showcased the fighter jet in action. It has been said more than once that Russia will not stop its war in Ukraine. The German defense minister named a specific date, 2029, when the Kremlin will start a war with NATO. Russia quickly switched to its defensive reaction, accusations, and declared that now there is no doubt who the aggressor is.
There are constant provocations by the Russian army on the Russian-Estonian border near Narva. Narva is the city where 90% of the population is Russian-speaking, and it is separated from the Russian Federation only by a river. And the Russian political and military elites believe that Estonia will be the Achilles heel of the NATO bloc in the event of a possible Russian invasion directly into the territory of the Baltic states.
While Russia does not make excuses for the wars it has started, everyone else is preparing to repel their attacks. Finland has begun artillery exercises just 100 kilometers from the Russian border. More than 2,000 military personnel and 500 pieces of equipment are taking part in them.
Turkey has long cemented its position as a key player in mediating a resolution to the Russia-Ukraine war. President Erdogan's stance is clear. He has consistently recognized Crimea as Ukrainian territory, and he remains ready to host a direct personal meeting between Presidents Putin and Zelenskyy. We delve deeper into Ankara's complex role and position in our report.
Turkey makes a bold statement. Peace in Ukraine is not just a goal, but an inevitability.
We are working on ending the war. I hope you will all see it soon.
Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan said in an interview with Aheba that even those who did not want the war to end are starting to think differently.
The war must end. We believe negotiations are inevitable. Personally, I believe that negotiations will resume. Of course, we cannot go into details. This could happen in Turkey, or it could happen somewhere else. But I believe that this peace will definitely come.
According to him, for 3 or 4 years, there were forces that actively prevented the end of the war. And now a classic turning point has come. These groups are changing their position. Fidan calls the war a war of attrition where neither side can emerge victorious and the losses are enormous, human, economic and political.
Of course, the war must end. That has been our policy from the very beginning. But in America and Europe, there were very influential groups that did not want this to stop.
He also emphasizes diplomacy remains the main path to peace. Turkey believes in creating a peace platform, possibly on its own territory. At the same time, Fidan does not reveal all the details for obvious reasons, but he says directly, peace is not just necessary, it is inevitable.
Right now, we are living through the darkest moment because both sides are focused on destroying each other's transport and energy infrastructure. They are striking military targets and have reached a deadlock. Now it is turned into a drone war.
In addition, the minister notes the serious burden the war places on European countries. Funding military aid is destabilizing budgets. Money is being spent not only on defense, education, healthcare, and infrastructure are suffering.
The European side is not actively participating in the war by sending troops, but it is constantly involved in the war with its money and support. And that comes at a high price. The blockade of Russia, you don't buy energy, you don't trade with it, with Russia. You have to pay for that.
However, Fidan also sees obstacles. According to him, the main one remains the status of the Donbas territory, specifically control over the so-called DPR territories. He warns that any settlement must be realistic, taking into account the situation on the front and the interests of both sides. At the same time, Turkey is ready to play an active role. Fidan states that Ankara will not refuse any role in the peace process and that negotiations must be long-term and effective.
Winter is ahead of us. What we are seeing now, in fact, we have all the conditions for peace, for a ceasefire.
If we are to believe the Turkish Foreign Ministry, right now may be the closest point to a halt in the fighting, to a shift toward diplomacy.
I think this war is now going through its worst phase, because both sides are focused on destroying transport and energy infrastructure. Now it has turned into a drone war. No one can move anywhere. Only those who disregard losses are advancing.
An important warning from Fidan: a peace platform is possible, but unpleasant decisions, including territorial ones, may be part of a future agreement.
A revolutionary defense agreement with France focused on air defense has been reached. Furthermore, Ukraine is ambitiously planning to manufacture 20 million domestically produced drones next year. For details on these major developments concerning international supply agreements and Ukraine's record ramp-up of its own weapon production, watch our full report.
Kyiv is becoming a global center for the production of combat drones. Currently, Ukraine produces up to 4 million combat UAVs annually. Meanwhile, the US manufactures less than 100,000 combat drones per year. And 4 million is not the limit of the capabilities of the Ukrainian defense industry. With sufficient funding, this number could increase several times over. This was written on his page by Ukraine's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Andriy Sybiha.
The current arms race is not about nuclear weapons, but about millions of cheap drones. Whoever can ramp up production faster will secure peace. With sufficient funding, we can produce up to 20 million drones next year. Andriy Sybiha, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine.
Right now, Ukraine is racing against time, both in terms of resources and technology. And the issue of increasing UAV production is a matter of survival. Ukrainian companies are not only meeting the needs of the defense forces, but are also trying to enter international markets. Unique technologies tested in real combat conditions are attracting serious interest from partners. Some Ukrainian companies have already expanded their production not only within Ukraine, but also beyond its borders.
Ukrainian companies in Europe. Skaton has opened a facility in Slovakia and attracted over 10 million euros in investments. Flywell is preparing a joint production venture with Finland. Firepoint has received support from Denmark for the development of rocket fuel for the Flamingo cruise missile systems.
The Ukrainian company CIR is setting up a production line in Finland. Its founder, Alexander Hrakov, explained in an interview with Bloomberg that he is pursuing two goals in Finland. First, to ensure reliable supplies to the front in Ukraine by moving part of the production capacity outside the combat zone. And second, to attract Western funding to expand production.
The war and the need to finance, develop and manufacture weapons to fight a wealthier and larger adversary have pushed Ukrainian manufacturers to exchange technologies with their European allies. Hrakov is concerned that Europe is not learning quickly enough from Ukraine's experience. In the time it took him to set up a production line in Finland, his drones in Ukraine have already gone through 3 generations.
Not only the production of drones abroad, but also the assistance of our European partners is a key to victory in the war against Russia. Without exaggeration, a historic agreement was signed by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and French President Emmanuel Macron.
I want to emphasize the importance of this agreement. This is a strategic agreement that will be in effect for 10 years starting next year. We understand all the fundamentals of this agreement, political, financial and industrial. This is a historic agreement. It is extremely valuable that France is taking such a step toward achieving real, guaranteed security in Europe.
Under the terms of the agreement, Ukraine will acquire 100 Rafale F4 aircraft from France by 2035 for Ukraine's combat aviation. SAMP-T air defense systems, radars for them, air-to-air missiles and aerial bombs. Also, already this year, joint projects between the defense industries of the two countries will begin. This concerns joint production of interceptor drones and work on developing critical technologies for Ukrainian UAVs. Strengthening its own air defense and systematic deep strikes on Russian infrastructure are the key to Ukraine's successful end to the war.
A new ship shipment of weapons from the United Kingdom is on its way to Ukraine. London remains not only one of Ukraine's key strategic partners, but also our strongest advocate on the international stage. The UK continues to expand its support, from long-range missiles and anti-tank systems to air defense equipment and gear for mobile strike units. What exactly the United Kingdom has prepared this time to help the Ukrainian armed forces strengthen their position on the battlefield, we'll tell you in the next report.
Due to its weak position on the front lines, Russia is attacking critically important targets in Ukraine. Civilian infrastructure, destruction, and casualties among the population. Over the past day, Russian forces have attacked energy facilities in several regions of Ukraine. Restoration work is ongoing at the sites that were hit. A very important aspect in this matter is the energy assistance from the United Kingdom. The country, understanding the situation, has allocated more than 14 million euros.
Putin is trying to plunge Ukraine into darkness and cold as winter approaches. These vile strikes are not only an attack on Ukraine's security, but also a threat to the economic stability and growth of the United Kingdom.
London has announced the allocation of additional funds for carrying out vital repair work in Ukraine's energy sector to help Ukrainians this winter.
Russia has made Ukraine's civilian energy infrastructure a target in this war. Now, as we enter the cold winter, they are intensifying brutal attacks on energy and heating networks while Putin tries to intimidate the Ukrainian people. However, Ukraine continues to demonstrate exceptional resilience despite all the hardships.
The funding for restoration will ensure uninterrupted lighting and heating in Ukrainian homes, hospitals, and schools.
We are grateful to the United Kingdom and Prime Minister Keir Starmer for extending humanitarian and energy support to Ukraine and for the announced energy assistance package. In a situation where Russia is increasing the number of attacks on civilians and critical infrastructure, such solidarity is extremely important.
London continues to put pressure on Russia through sanctions as well. It has announced new restrictions for the Kremlin, which will be gradually implemented throughout 2026. This is a continuation of sanctions against oil giants, Putin's associates, Rosneft and Lukoil.
These strikes pose a threat not only to Ukraine's security, but also to the economic stability of the United Kingdom itself. Ukraine's security is our security. Together with our G7 partners, we stand side by side, supporting Ukraine and overcoming all challenges.
From the very first days of the full-scale war, the United Kingdom became one of Ukraine's key strategic partners, not only supplying weapons but also establishing effective financial and institutional support mechanisms.
The United Kingdom will continue to firmly enforce our financial sanctions as part of our broader response to Russia's barbaric invasion of Ukraine.
The United Kingdom has built an important system of military assistance for Ukraine, funding, innovative funds, international partnerships, credit mechanisms, and support for the Ukrainian defense industry.
It is Russia, not Ukraine, that must pay for Putin's illegal war. Using Russian assets to strengthen Ukraine's air defense is our right. Ukraine's security is critically important to us.
The UK Ministry of Defence has signed contracts with companies for the maintenance of armoured vehicles, the production of artillery shells, and the repair of transferred weapons. These contracts provide for the deployment of repair hubs on Ukrainian territory. It was the United Kingdom that became one of the first countries to supply Ukraine with high-precision missile weaponry. A real breakthrough was the decision to supply the long-range Storm Shadow missiles. In 2023, the British government announced the transfer of cruise missiles capable of striking targets at a distance of more than 250 kilometers. Storm Shadow became the first long-range missiles received by Ukraine and were immediately used to strike strategic targets in the occupied territories. This month, the armed forces of Ukraine received a new batch of Storm Shadow missiles. The United Kingdom has provided the Ukrainian armed forces with protective gear, vehicles, communications equipment, demining tools, as well as assistance with equipment maintenance and digital transformation. Britain was the first country to announce plans to supply Ukraine with main battle tanks.
Compared to the T-80, the stabilization and optics here are much better. Targeting is done using buttons on a panel similar to a joystick. The turret rotates 360 degrees in 9 seconds. The Challenger 2 maneuvers, making it difficult for enemy anti-tank guided missiles to aim. At the same time, the tank itself is very accurate.
As part of the Challenger 2 tank deliveries, ammunition for them was also received. The British tanks were supplemented with specialized repair and recovery vehicles, which made it possible to ensure their technical autonomy and use. In 2025, Ukraine and Britain signed a 100-year partnership agreement. This comprehensive document establishes long-term cooperation between the two countries in the areas of defense, economy, energy, justice, science, culture, education, healthcare, and social policy. Britain's assistance is long-term, so we can always count on the support of a reliable partner.
At this moment, that's all from me, Maria Farafonova. Even more hellish frontline news in our next episode. But for now, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. See you soon!